My grandmother told me a story about how once, when I was 4 years old and my mother had accepted a teaching position in South Africa, we attended a lunch with family friends. The adults in the room were talking about my mom and I's impending move, and at some point, someone turned to little Siri and asked, "Are you scared to move somewhere new?" At this point, my grandmother smiles and recalls that I looked this person in the eye, put my hands on my hips, and said, "Scared? Why would I be scared? I'm Siri." For those of you who have had the pleasure or nightmare of knowing me, you know that not much has changed. And this is how I began my life as a third culture kid with my hands on my hips. A third culture kid, also commonly known as a TCK, is a term used to describe a child who grew up and were raised in a culture or cultures that is different from their parents. This is typically due to their parents' jobs, and their moves are defined as voluntary or time-bound. Their reasons for relocation are different from those who are forced and/or heavily compelled to leave their country. And having the power to choose when and where you move creates different expectations for the expatriated living in their host country. The process of acculturation, or adapting one's personal beliefs to match the surrounding culture, is not as heavily stressed for expats as it is for those defined as immigrants. Thus, the TCK does not fully belong to their home country or their host country, but in fact exists in a space between the two, a third space. In my case, my mother was a teacher and worked at international schools, so stay with me for a second. I was born in Kuwait, and I lived there for a year. Then, we moved back to Minnesota, where my mother is from, and lived there for 4 years. Down to South Africa for 4 years. Tunisia for 2 years. Norway for 4 years. Thailand for 2 years, almost done. 3 different locations in the United States over 8 years. And now, for the past year and a half, I've found myself living in Myanmar. Changing locations frequently, and therefore much of what is familiar to daily life, is nothing new to me. In fact, it feels more common than staying in any one place for very long. So, what kind of person does this lifestyle create? TCKs are frequently characterized by their openness to a variety of perspectives, a deep appreciation for diversity, and a familiarity with loss. Excuse me. Like me, other TCKs were and are habitually moving, always saying hello and goodbye. Because they are consistently meeting new people, research shows that TCKs are more flexible and open-minded compared to their local or home peers. So exposure to diversity promotes tolerance and acceptance. These traits, which are frequently forged by a TCK lifestyle, have the power to be absolute strengths in an individual's life. But my experience also says that it's not as easy as just getting to those traits. So I believe that it is good to strive towards being tolerant and open-minded, and that the process of getting there can be extremely tough because it is aggravating to struggle. When you don't grow up in your home country, there can be a level of disconnect when relating to anyone. You don't quite belong where you live, and you don't quite belong at home, and because you're missing experiences in both cultural experiences in both of those places, right? And as a child, I greatly struggled with understanding my place in the world because of it. I'm not alone in this. TCKs can struggle with their sense of belonging. Belonging is a fundamental human need that is established in childhood and reinforced throughout life. I would define it as a subjective feeling of deep connection with social groups, physical places, individuals, and collective experiences. Belonging is not a permanent feeling, because no feelings are permanent, but rather a fluid and an ephemeral experience. It is so important to our bodies and our humanness that belonging has been observed on the neural, peripheral, behavioral, and social levels. And this is my grandma on her birthday this year with her friends. Because the TCK experience is inherently dynamic, mobile, and shifting, growing up this way can cause similar development in their being TCK's, sense of identity and belonging. Belonging can provide safety, comfort, and acceptance, and these feelings are challenging for TCKs to grapple with, as many self-report a pervasive feeling of difference and a sense of loss. In a literature review looking at TCKs and belonging, the contributing authors identified 3 themes that generally define a TCK's experience with belonging. And they are 1, belonging everywhere and nowhere, 2, having a home with other cross-cultural individuals, and 3, having a home identifying as a TCK. In my experience, I have found due to TCKs having similar themes within their lives and how they are raised, there can be an easy familiarity and quick connection that can form due to our shared background, even if it's not in the exact same locations. One of my very best friends to this day, Sammy, is a TCK. We met 10 years ago, our first weekend in college, which is 10 years ago this year, which is kind of crazy. But we bumped into each other in the lunch line and somehow quickly figured this information out about each other and have been inseparable ever since. Partly because I think we have complementary personalities, but also because our shared familiarity with change allowed for a moment of deep gratitude with each other, where that ubiquitous loss that is familiar to a TCK life was not so permeating. Because we were moving due to my mother's job, all of the change was very much outside of my control. As a child, and even now, I really struggle with the question, where are you from? Because any TCK will tell you that they have a short answer and a long answer. And this is because an individual's sense of self emerges from one's predominant social and environmental contexts. Identity development is a key, or identity formation is a key developmental feature for humans, one that is benefited by stability. My sense of identity was greatly challenged by the flux of the world around me. I now know that one of the ways I handled the change involved prioritizing flexibility and external motivation. TCKs learn to socially adapt quickly in order to acquire belonging. Because I am a TCK, or I was and am human, so possess the desire to belong, I found myself greatly focused on others' positive responses to me and motivated by what I thought would produce greater positive responses, often disregarding authenticity to myself in the process. Sorry, I kind of blanked for a second. Oh, I'm there again. On the surface level, this led to me doing and saying things, right, that weren't natural or real to me. And on a deeper level, this focus on pleasing others, which was rooted in a desire to belong and for identity development, it produced a deep-seated fear and anxiety around upsetting or disappointing others. I thought my world would fall apart if people did not like me. And this was a really dangerous loop to be stuck in. In order to avoid my fear of rejection or not being accepted or liked, I would work really hard to be accepted and to be someone people wanted to be around, which in turn would make me scared of losing any future kind of connection or acceptance. And it was just a spiral that wouldn't end. By the time I was 18, I had moved countries 6 times. This also means that I had said goodbye to friends and loved ones more times than that. This repeated exposure led me to realize how quickly relationships can change and get lost through being in different places, in different time zones, leading different daily lives that you would never be able to fully explain to the other. That was devastating. And it still is at times. I think I carried a lot of sadness because of it. Whether you're being left or doing the leaving, all parties are hurt in the process. When I was being left, I had to confront, like I said, this idea of people moving forward with their lives, having experiences and being transformed by them in ways that I would never be able to grasp or understand. And it was heartbreaking. When I was doing the leaving, I was forced to confront the ephemeral nature of human connection and relationships, and often found myself thinking, what's the point? Why try to connect? Why be vulnerable? Why be open and honest if one of us is just going to leave inevitably? And my experience tells me that everyone leaves inevitably. In an effort to avoid the pain of vulnerability and the grief of goodbye, I chose fun. I chose the mask of unseriousness and cracking jokes and being a positive person to be around. And the adaptation of this mask led me to not understanding other expressions of emotions at times. When we would leave the US at holiday time, I could never understand why, like my cousins, for example, were so visibly upset. Internally, it never felt appropriate to show those emotions in my head. But despite these challenges that can occur that are challenging to reconcile in a TCK's life, I do believe it is possible. Developing a sense of belonging and ability to adapt to change are flexible skills, ones that can be learned and strengthened. And this need for reconciliation is not exclusive to TCKs. And that is because the nature of change and its associated feelings are, one, a universal experience that all must contend with, and two, an experience that is capable of creating greater understanding, compassion, humor, and strength. One of the ways we can address this is through examining personal perspective. When we focus, or internal change is easier to instigate than external change, because internal change is closer to our realm of control than external variables are. Internal change is focused on what is already within our capabilities and is therefore more reliable than external influences exerting their influence. It can be empowering to realize that you can rely on yourself in times of uncertainty, and that in turn improves your personal relationship to change. Perspective change is tangible change. And part of adapting to change involves accepting its universality. What remains then is curiosity and a desire to understand. So, the next time change comes your way, because you know it will, I hope that you are able to look it dead in the eye, put your hands on your hips, and incredulously ask, scared? Why would I be scared? Thank you.